Good evening. My name is John Miserak. I work with Tetra Tech. We're a consultant that's working currently with Richland County and working on this the next opportunity that the county has to secure recovery funds for the floods that occurred here in the county in October of last year. We're going to be specifically talking about the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds, or the CDBG-DR funding. As you can imagine, working with the federal government, there's always a lot of acronyms, and you'll probably hear me use this acronym a lot this evening as we go through this presentation. The whole idea behind this presentation is we want to really set the stage for this unique opportunity the county has before it as the county begins to kick off the process that it needs to take to be able to access and utilize these dollars in the county for its recovery. The CDBG program is something that's been around for a long time. You can see that it was created under Title I back in 1974 through federal legislation. It is federal dollars. And as you can see up on the screen, there are a number of categories that money could be used for. Previously, these funds were in individual silos, and you had to go in and apply for each of those programs independently. And it really was somewhat cumbersome as it relates to being able to figure out how to use this money for disaster recovery. What they've been able to do with the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds is pull all of those together and allow for one program that can be very flexible and be used for multiple uses. And as you saw on that list, there's a number of uses that you can use the money for as it relates to recovery from disasters. It was first appropriated by the United States Congress back in 1992, and it's been used for many disasters across the United States. And as you can see, a list up there is just a few of them. The World Trade Center in 2001 received funding, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Hurricane Irene in 2011, Hurricane Sandy that happened in 2013, as well as the flooding that occurred here in Richland County in 2015. Received just a hair under $97 million. So you can see that there was a significant amount of the $300 million actually was appropriated and approved here in South Carolina for the flooding that occurred in 2015. As I mentioned when we started off, this is a new opportunity for the county. With that comes some requirements and some challenges, and we really want to take a few minutes this evening to be able to lay out what some of those requirements are going to be so that everybody understands and can get a good foundation built on their understanding of where this money can be spent, what the county needs to do to be able to spend the money, and what it can be used for. There's an action plan development that's required as part of this. That's what the county is kicking off. As of June 22nd of 2016, a 90-day window started here in the county. And that 90-day window is the development of the action plan. That action plan is the roadmap for the county to be able to spend the money that it received from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Underneath that, it's going to take a little bit of time. It takes about 90 days to be able to work through that process. It takes another 45 days for HUD to review that and approve the plan, and then move into program and project development, and then be able to start working to spend the money. So it's important to know that time frame as we're working toward over the summer and in the early part of the fall. There are program and eligibility limitations with this funding. Although it's flexible, there are limitations on how the money can be spent. And those will come up as we begin to accept applications and be able to take a look at the various programs that are eligible. One of the key parts about this funding that is really unique is its gap funding. What that means is the county is undergoing an effort right now, and as part of their action plan, to identify unmet needs. What are unmet needs? Unmet needs are taking a look at the costs of the disaster, looking at what has already been spent, and what's that gap. The uniqueness about this money is this money can fill that gap. A lot of times in the past, before this program came out, that gap just remained and had to be made up sometimes by personal money, or maybe sometimes the projects never could get done. This program comes in and provides that gap. One real unique element is it's the only program out there that you can actually use it and leverage this federal source against another federal source. And that's a really unique part of this funding. As you go through this effort here, it's something that the county will be able to take a look at and be able to figure out if they want to be able to work through that and be able to spend it with some of the other money that they've received from the federal government. It's very, very unique. Now, we can't take it and spend it on other programs that are funded by other traditional recovery efforts. So as you see some of those other funding sources that are up there, you're not going to be able to spend it on those programs themselves, but you can use it if there happens to be a gap there and be able to spend it to cover that gap. There do come some unique federal requirements, as always does with the federal programs. You have some labor standards with the Davis-Bacon wages. You have procurement requirements. You have environmental review processes that you have to go through. Some of the stuff is typical to the CDBG dollars that are out there that the county gets on a yearly basis. But some of these unique challenges are not something that the county cannot overcome. And the flip side of that is what then comes as the opportunities that are there. And as I mentioned, the breadth of eligible activities. The county's gone through some processes to identify damages to residential properties. And with those damages, there may be people that want to do rehab. Well, some of the programs that they've been able to access or at least apply for funding have not been able to use money for rehabilitation. Under the CDBG-DR program, you're able to do that. So there's some uniqueness to this program that may not be out there with other funding sources, and it's going to be a real unique opportunity for the county. As I mentioned, it's the only one that I know that you can actually provide in and be able to leverage against other federal funding. As I mentioned, the HMGP 404 program is a program that people apply for, and there's always a matching requirement there. It's a federal source. This money can be used and has been used in previous disasters to be able to fill that gap and be able to play that match role for that additional federal funding. Most of the other recovery programs do not allow you to build it bigger or better than what it was. Most of them say you have to go in and build it back to the way it was. Well, people started getting smarter as this program started developing, and they realized that incorporating resilience measures into the funding sources is critical. So that if you're going to come in, you can come in and actually use the money to make that culvert bigger to be able to hopefully mitigate some of the future flooding. You may be able to improve that bridge so that it has wider gaps on it so that more floodwaters can flow through that during a time of flooding. Building that resiliency piece in is something that's very unique with this program, and it's something that a lot of places have taken into account as they've been moving through these programs. The county's had some opportunities to take a look at drainage areas and culverts as part of their efforts to try to identify where could some resilience projects be able to be funded, and that's been part of and will be factored into the development of the action plan. And then there's a very strong focus on vulnerable populations. Anybody who's worked with U.S. HUD programs know that HUD programs are very centric upon vulnerable populations, low to moderate income populations and so forth. And those vulnerable populations is where this program has got a focus on it. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes as to what the requirements are with this. But it has definitely got a very big focus on vulnerable populations as you begin to move projects forward. As the county works through receiving applications and receiving ideas for projects, there are a set of key questions that the county is going to need to work through. And these are directly related back to some of the requirements of the program. One, is it a project that's eligible underneath traditional CDBG funding? If you remember that first slide, there were a number of categories out there: infrastructure, housing, economic development, sewer, water, those types of programs. Is it something that's eligible underneath that program? The county is going to need to ask that question of all the requests for funding to make sure that it does meet that eligibility. How is it impacted by duplication of benefits? What does that mean? If you've received $100,000 for $110,000 damage and you come in and ask for $100,000, duplication of benefits. You can't pay for the same thing twice, which I think everybody realizes is critically important. It's something that needs to be looked at through this program, and will be something that the county has to take into consideration as they're working through applications. Is there a direct link to the disaster? This is a unique question that you have to ask. You can have a direct link. What is a direct link? A direct link would be your house was flooded by the flood waters and you have damage there. A direct link back to the disaster could be this culvert flooded over here and flooded this, and so that culvert maybe needs to be improved so that the flooding doesn't occur down there. There's a direct link to the disaster, but it wasn't necessarily that was like your house that was flooded. So there's ways for you to be creative in this, to be able to drive it back, or to link it back to the disaster so that you can meet this criteria and this question that's on here. Is the project timeline consistent with the program requirements? Underneath this allotment of CDBG-DR dollars, the timeline is 6 years. Under the Hurricane Sandy appropriation, which was in the neighborhood of $13 billion, they actually had a timeline of 2 years. And that's 2 years from obligation. So it's not necessarily 2 years from December, it's 2 years from when contracts and grants are appropriated. But that 6-year window gives a little bit of flexibility here, but it also puts some constraints on different projects that may take longer than that 6-year window. And then the next two are pretty important as well. Will it meet a national objective? And will it help to meet the low moderate income targeting requirements that are part of this program? And those two areas will hit. These are the 3 national objectives that you have to hit. You can hit all 3. You can hit 2 out of 3, but you have to at least hit 1. And out of those national objectives, you see you have low to moderate income, and we talked a little bit about that, and you start to look at the different criteria for people and for jobs as it relates to being able to benefit low moderate income. When you look at housing projects, as you see on the bottom of that portion of the slide, that references back to the income levels of the people that are in the house. And so if there's money going to be going into a housing project, then there's going to have to be some income verification to be able to determine whether or not they're in that low to moderate income population within the community. Your jobs, it is related back, you can use some of this funding to benefit for economic development purposes, to be able to help to address some of those disaster impacts that occurred. The jobs themselves would have to have salaries that are around low and moderate income salaries. The one thing that I want to point out that's very critically important on this is the 70% of funds, as you see there on the far right part of the screen. Underneath this program, and as was set with the Federal Register, at least 70% of the $23.5 million that Richland County received must benefit low to moderate income populations. So that's going to be critical as the county goes through and starts working through, identifying and receiving applications for different projects and programs, because they're going to have to take that into account. That is something that is very strict with HUD on their programs, and it's something that they're going to be looking at through this, and the county will have to be able to respond when asked how did they benefit the low moderate income minimum numbers that were included in the Federal Register notice when the program was published, when it was published a couple weeks ago. You can also look at slum and blight as a national objective, and you can also look at urgent need. There are projects that fit urgent need if they don't fit low to moderate income populations. So that 30% that's there that may not need to be focused into the low moderate income population can fall sometimes underneath an urgent need, a national objective for here. But the critical point here is that each application that comes in is going to have to go through this test to be determined whether or not it meets at least one of these national objectives. The program categories and the project categories that are eligible for the use of this funding, and I think this is important so people can start to kind of piece together and kind of visualize where they can see this money maybe being spent here in Richland County. Underneath housing, which is one of the critical missions of HUD, underneath housing you can see programs for voluntary buyouts. So they can come in, people would come in interested in maybe selling their flood-prone properties. And so the money can be used for those types of voluntary buyouts. They can be used for elevation, to get properties that may be below the base flood elevation up above the base flood elevation to try to help reduce the impacts of the flooding. Or in third, and I mentioned this earlier about why this money is so flexible, is rehabilitation of houses. That's another type of housing type project that can occur. So anybody who's got projects or got repairs that need to be done to their house can apply for this program underneath the rehabilitation program. Setting up those three categories are going to be critical and going to be part of what comes out of the unmet needs analysis that the county does, where they identify the different types of housing needs. And that way they'll be able to then create those programs that are going to be most effective here in the county and be able to tailor them so that they can have the greatest impact. Infrastructure is what you probably would think it is. Infrastructure can be anything from damaged sewer systems to stormwater conveyance systems to roads, bridges, anything that you can think of like that that's public infrastructure falls underneath the infrastructure category. And so those types of projects can also be placed into the action plan and then have programs created to be able to fund those types of projects. Economic development. One of the neat things about this program is that it also takes a look at the economics of a community, and HUD now understands as they're working through this program that looking at businesses, job loss, job closures, those types of things, equipment loss, things along those lines are also critically important to the overall resilience and recovery of a community. And so economic development programs can also be a part of the program that HUD or that the county puts together. Those can take the forms of low interest loans, they can take the forms of working capital for businesses, they can take job force training. Those are just a few of the types of programs and projects that you could see coming out of the economic development portion. And then the planning category, there may be certain types of planning efforts that may need to be done that might be used to create or develop certain types of projects. And so those types of programs are also eligible underneath this. As the county works through the action plan process, as the county works through the unmet needs analysis, these will start to take shape. And during that 90-day period of time, the county will be working to try to figure out how much money they want to allot in each of these different categories and what those sub-programs are. That action plan, as I mentioned earlier, is really the roadmap for how the county intends to spend the $23.5 million. And so these categories are where they're at, where that will be defined out in a little more detail and will be a document that's publicly accessible by any of the people in the community to be able to see how the county intends on being able to spend this money. The action plan timeline that I've been referring to, again, was it's a 90-day window for the county to develop this action plan. It started June 22nd. So the clock's been ticking for just about a week as on here. There's a lot that the county is going to be working through. These public outreach meetings are one of those elements, trying to get information from everybody about where they might see some unmet need in the community, what the needs are, some of the residents, the business owners, property owners, where did the flooding occur, those types of things. So this meeting right here is part of the action plan development. Prior to the action plan actually being started, the county went through some initial planning and coordination. And that was really critical and important for the county. The county set up a Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee that has representations of various stakeholders, the United Way, state agencies, citizens, other types of interest groups that are in the county, that make up the county. They wanted a real grassroots-driven committee. And they put a Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee together that's also going to be helping as part of the action plan development. But that group has been helping the county understand where the needs are, understand where the data's at, what kind of reports are there, and being able to provide those to the county so the county can really make sure they have a solid set of data sources so that they understand where the disaster occurred. They've also been working to coordinate staff and resources and other planning partners. The county has been involved with the long-term recovery group and leading that effort, which involves a lot of the NGOs and the VOADs, or voluntary organizations after disasters, which are providing a lot of resources in the community. It's really critically important that those are coordinated with during the recovery efforts. And being able to develop some recovery goals. The county, it's critical to the county that they come together with all of those key stakeholders and all of the information and be able to develop some goals of where they want to be able to help to identify where resources are at and where they want to invest resources in there. And so they've been working on that portion of it for probably 3 to 4 months and have been really making a lot of progress out there as it relates to being able to accomplish those goals and those different types of responsibilities and different types of chores that they've been assigned. The identify unmet needs and recovery gaps. We talked a little bit about the importance of these meetings and being able to get the public and the stakeholder outreach for understanding where the unmet needs are. This is a critical element of the development of the action plan, is really reaching out into the community and making sure that stakeholders, residents, property owners, business owners, they're all part of this process. It's a real grassroots effort. So that effort is working currently over the next 2 weeks to 3 weeks here in the county. Another element of that is really looking at quantitative data. So the county has been working with FEMA and insurance organizations and SBA, the Small Business Assistance Program, to get information on where people have contacted them, where they might have submitted claims, where they might have provided information to them so that they have some good quantitative data as well. And then they want to be able to take a look at that and catalog where all those efforts are and where all the needs are at. That, as I mentioned, that unmet needs analysis is really the main kind of is the glue that holds this whole thing together. You really have to understand where those unmet needs are so that you can develop the programs. It's a critical requirement of the program that where the money is pocketed in those various categories I just went over have to be tied back to unmet needs that are directly related to the disaster. And so that's a critical element. The county right now is currently working on this, and we're working over the next couple of weeks to be able to figure out where those gaps are at so they can start to quantify the unmet needs. After they work through that process, then you have program development and prioritization, and really what that is what types of projects, what types of programs does the county need to be able to meet those unmet needs? And they will work to develop those types of programs. It could be a housing rehabilitation program, it could be a buyout program for houses, it could be an infrastructure program, there could be information coming from the business community, so an economic development program. Those types of programs are going to be developed. Certain types of criteria that are going to need to be met to be able to get into those programs are going to be established as part of this process, and that information will then be incorporated into the action plan so that it becomes, again, that true roadmap to be able to spend the money. Then you look at the finalization of the action plan and design the recovery implementation programs. That action plan, as I mentioned, has to be developed and has to be submitted to HUD within 90 days from June 22nd. There will be a 14-day comment period that is listed there for the public to be able to provide comment on the actual draft plan itself. So it doesn't really look like a long time when you start to think about it. You look at it on a calendar. There's not a lot of time to be able to work through this, and so they have to work through this. And once that action plan is finalized, submitted to HUD, and HUD has their 45-day review period. Once that's done, the county then can begin to start to develop and implement those programs and start to work with the community to be able to try to invest that money into those different projects and programs that were identified through the process. That's going to take a little bit of time. As I mentioned, you looked at a 90-day window, another 45 days for HUD to review that, and then you start to think about the time frame to be able to set those programs up and start to walk through the actual implementation of those programs and being able to get the money out. So you're looking down the road here of maybe 4.5, 5 to 6 months before that money is able to be actually invested into the community. And it's critical to understand that because it comes with those requirements that the county must do this action plan, the county must reach out to the public, the county must identify those unmet needs and develop that action plan as part of the process to be able to actually access this money. This money's been awarded to the county. but the county has to go through this action planning process before it can actually take that money and draw it down and start to invest it in the community. So that's critically important to understand and take away from tonight. So what we're looking at is we're really looking at the rest of the evening being spent talking to you, the general public. And you may be asking your question of how can I get involved? What's my role here? Why am I sitting here other than just listening to this program? What can I do? Well, what the county wants to know is what your local knowledge, what your personal knowledge is of the disaster that occurred here in October of 2015. What was the damage? What were the impacts? So what we want to do is provide an opportunity for you to be able to provide that information that can then feed into the unmet needs analysis and be able to help to shape those programs and those priorities here in the county. Tonight what we've got is we've got two ways that you can help us. We've got maps up here in the front of the room, and we have what they call large post-it notes. What we want to do is work with you to come up. We'd invite you to come up and spend a little bit of time talking with us about some things that your local knowledge of the disaster, and be able to provide us with that information so we can take that back in, factor it into the action plan development. The other way we could do it is in the back of the room there are some comment sheets that you can fill out and provide to us as well. We'd ask you to be very specific on those comment sheets so that we can understand exactly what your local knowledge is and what you'd like to be able to provide to us. It's important to note that the information that you're providing to us is going to be used by the county to develop the unmet needs. It is not going to be used to appropriate or provide grant dollars to you specifically. There will be programs that will be developed as part of the action planning process. Those programs will have applications that you will be able to prepare and submit to the county, and that's how you will be able to access the money at a later date. But I just want to make sure that everybody's clear, and it's clear that by providing us with the information up here, that is not equal to you submitting an application this evening to the county. The county is only using this information right now to be able to calculate the unmet needs and be able to make sure the action plan has got all the information it can in it. You'll be able to follow the progress of the programs and the recovery efforts with this on the website that you see up here on the screen. You'll be able to contact the county through that email if you'd like to be able to ask any questions as we're going through this process. And again, I would encourage everybody to be really looking out for that. I also know the county, as they have in the past, will do a lot of outreach to be able to make sure that everybody knows that the programs are open once they're developed and they're set up, and encourage you to be able to come in and apply to the county for that funding. As we get closer to the program implementation, there will be a lot of information that is shared with what does that process actually look like of how you will be able to come in to the county to be able to access those apply and access those dollars. So that information will be developed and will be out there and communicated to the public at large once we have the action plan done and the programs are set up. So with that, I will encourage you to come up and interact with us. As I said, we'll have two people assigned over here, and we're interested to hear exactly what your local knowledge is and what the information that you have that you'd like to share.